Okay, welcome back. Hi, I am Nick Cassiati. I am your host, and today we have a three-part special. Our first topic is coming at you right now. Stimulus framework has been released from the Biden team to include $1,400 stimulus payments, enhanced unemployment, and $15 an hour minimum wage. With the vaccine rolling out and more people going back to work, Austin, do we need this massive $1.9 trillion bill?
It's a step in the right direction, to be honest. Minimum wage has been the same for over 10 years. There's nowhere in the country that you can afford rent for a two-bedroom apartment for $7 an hour. As for the $1,400, I feel like it's kind of a stab in the back because we had been pushing $2,000 a month universal basic income retroactive since the start of the pandemic. But the Democrats said, hey, you already got $600, here's $1,400. You said $2,000. So in total, it's kind of a stab in the back to the activists and the people who have been pushing for it and the people who have been suffering the most under the pandemic. But I believe it is a step in the right direction. However, a very, very small one.
So, I mean, Republicans, if they were on this with us, which they're not, right? I just want to get more information out of you. They would argue back that what does minimum wage have to do with a stimulus bill? What does, at $1.9 trillion, that's a massive amount of money. And the Democrats, the first time around, the Republicans and Trump tried to work with Democrats to get $2,000 stimulus checks. I mean, Trump is famous in tweeting that that's what he wanted, and they settled at $600. Now, to true that up, we're at $1,400. But what does the minimum wage have to do with this?
Has to do everything with it. If the workers can't afford to feed themselves, how are they going to take care of their families? How are they going to be able to pay their rent? Mortgages and rents should have been canceled. That's what they did in many countries. For many people put a moratorium on evictions. Many housing and houselessness or unhomed people's activists have been working very hard to try to cancel the rent in many different cities. So it has everything to do with it.
So to that point, though, right? So, again, a Republican would argue back. They would say, with this stimulus bill, we're seeing many people getting vaccinated at this point. We're seeing many people get the opportunity to go back to work. A lot of locations are reopening. There's many reopening plans underway right now. Do we need something this big?
Yes, because the United States government has failed systematically for the past year with this pandemic. They had such a long time to prepare compared to countries like South Korea, Taiwan, and even China. They had months to prepare for it, and they didn't. They fell flat on their face. So we have to make up for those lost months where we were completely unprepared. China, and compared to H1N1, it took the United States about 6 weeks to tell the World Health Organization, hey, we have a possible pandemic here. Where the People's Republic of China took like 6 days, less than 6 days, to tell the World Health Organization that something uncouth, something fishy is going on.
Sure.
So yeah, we have to make up for that lost time where millions of Americans have lost their jobs.
Okay, Angela, we're looking at another $1.9 trillion bill. A massive amount of money, potentially on day one of Joe Biden walking into office, making it the quickest anybody has ever spent $1.9 trillion. Do we need to spend that amount of money?
I don't think that we should be saddling future generations with massive amounts of debt and inflation. I don't think it's right. No.
$15 an hour minimum wage is added into that, and that also eliminates the server minimum wage, which has typically been a lot less, or the tipped minimum wage. It brings everything up to $15 an hour. Does this mean that we don't tip our servers or waitstaff anymore?
I think this is a really well-meaning thing to try to go after. I understand emotionally the arguments for minimum wage, but the reality is that jobs are going to disappear. especially at small businesses. I'm sure Amazon will carry on just fine if they want to. Mega corporations aren't the ones that this is going to be damaging. It's people who work at small businesses and people who have minimum wage jobs. You're going to see more of these jobs disappear, and you'll see people's hours cut. And I understand all of the moral arguments for it, but we have to understand this isn't a moral decision. It's a business decision that small businesses and people who run even large organizations are going to be forced to make when they're trying to maintain their shareholders' expectations and stay in business. That's the framework that we need to work within, and that's why I think that the federal minimum wage is the wrong decision.
We're looking at roughly 9 to 11 million people still out of work. That number hasn't been defined exactly at this moment right now. So we're talking $1.9 trillion for roughly 9 to 11 million people still out of work due to COVID. Should everybody be getting this type of stimulus, or should we have just targeted those individuals?
Well, from a pragmatic libertarian perspective, I think we should be targeting the people who are hurting the most, not blanket sending out checks to everyone. Why do people who are still pulling in six-figure incomes and working from home as programmers need stimulus checks? That makes no sense. The best thing to do, in my opinion, would be to reopen the economy and allow people to go back to work. And even from a pragmatic perspective, which is not one I totally agree with, maybe those people could have an option as to whether or not they stay home because of pandemic issues or go back to work. There are so many options available between the just straight open the economy, don't give anyone handouts issue, and the other extreme, which is just keep everything closed and give everyone a bunch of money. And it disappoints me that the government hasn't entered into discussions about some of the more options that they have available. That shows me that we're not really interested in any kind of bipartisan progress or solutions that would empower people to take back their lives and their careers and maybe have some upward mobility in the discussion.
Rez, as a Democrat, especially a progressive Democrat, this is a lot of money being spent right now. Austin brought up the point that we may be saddling ourselves for the future. Under President Biden, this potentially could be the first thing that he has his signature on. Would this be an accomplishment or not?
Okay, so it will be an accomplishment, but I'm going to separate my points into two. I'm going to first talk about the survival check, and then go into the relief bill. But in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, which may not be shared by majority within the Democratic base, paying Americans $1,400 instead of $2,000 has the potential to be a messaging blunder for the Democrats. Now, I believe many in Georgia waited in line expecting $2,000 survival checks. $1,400 for Americans is simply not enough. You have to keep in mind that many adult dependents didn't even get the $600, nor do I believe they got the $1,200. So they'll be getting $1,400 for the first time. In my opinion, every American should receive $2,000 in survival checks, and these checks should be retroactive, as in every American should receive them for however long this pandemic has lasted. I hope that this $1,400 check is a negotiating tactic by Biden in order to get some Republican support. And when they eventually buck Biden, then I hope that he agrees to $2,000 in survival checks. And I hope progressive Democrats put the pressure on Biden to do the right thing. Regarding the rest of the bill, it paints a stark contrast between the Biden administration and the Trump administration. While the relief bill under the Trump administration was a bailout for large corporations, this relief bill under the Biden administration will directly help American people. Unemployment benefits will be extended up until September, and unemployed Americans will be receiving $400. Keep in mind that under the Trump COVID relief bill, these benefits were set to expire in March and would not be renewed had Trump won re-election or if Republicans kept the Senate. Public schools will receive funding to safely reopen. State and local governments will receive much needed aid, which will help keep jobs and prevent any drastic budget cuts. Lastly, minimum wage will finally be increased to $15 an hour, which is a living wage. No American who works 40 to 80 hours a week should live under poverty. That's ridiculous. It's been long overdue, and it's finally minimum wage will be increased. Lastly, money will be invested in a robust vaccine distribution. Better days are finally ahead of us, and I think we're going to witness a great American comeback under Joe Biden.
So again, not to attack you, Rez. We just want more information and to get you to clarify your points, right? So with the $15 an hour minimum wage that's baked into this bill, Republicans would say that it was a shady way of getting $15 an hour into the bill itself. That's what their argument would be. As well as they would say that small business owners would have to cut employees because of raising the wage almost double to what it is right now for a full-time employee. So that would technically be what their argument back to you would be. Obviously, I don't have one on the show, but what would you say to their points?
So data does not support this idea that raising the minimum wage to a living wage will result in massive job cuts. We have seen cities and states pay workers a living wage, and we have not seen massive layoffs. What we have seen is that when Americans are being paid a living wage, they can spend that money on things rather than work their butts off just to make ends meet, just to scrap by. Americans should be paid a living wage. No one should live under poverty while working full time. This is not just a moral argument, but this is an economic argument as well. Pay Americans a living wage, and you watch how the economy is stimulated, rather than make Americans just barely scrap by on next to nothing.
Angela, can you respond, please?
Sure. I don't believe that a minimum wage is intended to be a living wage. So there's a fundamental disagreement between people in the country about what the purpose of minimum wage is. When I was a teenager, I got into the workforce by working a minimum wage job at a fast food restaurant. It was not a full-time career. And now we have seen a lot of teenagers just drop out of the workforce entirely because those jobs are no longer available to them. Companies have to be a little bit more selective about who they choose to employ because they have to invest more money into their employers. And that's a problem, and it also stunts our young people and makes it more difficult for them to enter into the workforce. You see similar things happen in low-income communities. I think that people should be able to get employed if they want for slightly less money. What's really tragic about a $15 minimum wage is it cuts out of the workforce anyone who's willing to work for $14 an hour, which is still a pretty darn good wage in places across the country. Maybe not Los Angeles or New York City, but maybe in rural South Dakota, $14 an hour it's still pretty respectable. It's pretty good. So I don't like when policies are implemented at a federal level and people don't get a personal choice in the matter. It's like there's no nuance to the discussion, and I don't think that's helpful for poor people who are trying to get a leg up.
Austin, she brings up a good point. So we've even seen it here in Florida. I'm sure Rez could speak to that as well, that a lot of our McDonald's here have replaced cashiers with walk-up touchpads, basically. So she does bring up a point that there could potentially be job loss associated with increasing the minimum wage under this bill, right? What's disguised, or what, I don't want to say disguised, but what's being passed through a COVID relief bill would intentionally then move the minimum wage up for everybody in the United States, not just the targeted approach. So how do you respond to Angela's points?
I have no faith in the capitalist system within the United States. Automation is something that is going to happen whether we like it or not. We've seen it many times, again and again, where there's an incentive for profit, there's an incentive for exploitation in people and in the environment as well. So automation such as cashiers and stuff like that will just happen no matter what. Capitalists will always seek to find a profit, and if it means cutting workers, it means cutting workers. It's hard for me to comprehend if in the United States, if workers are seen as a commodity that it can be bought and sold to the highest bidder, or if workers are actually people. It's very hard in a capitalist system to treat people as people when the ruling class and those people who always seek to make a profit are always looking for the biggest bang for their buck. They're always looking for the biggest area in which they can make money. You know, the exploitative system that Karl Marx talked about over 250 years ago. For example, we have Amazon in Etna, Ohio, opened up a giant plant in a poor community, offering $15 an hour minimum wage, and they use fear tactics to hire people, saying, "Oh, there's plenty of poor, unemployed people here, so if you don't do your job, we'll just fire and replace you." So it leads to exploitative conditions where workers are peeing in bottles, workers are passing out, and old workers are being discriminated against because they can't keep up with the mandatory quotas.
Okay, Angela, I'm going to let you respond to Austin, and then Rez, I'll let you have the final word as we finish up here. Go ahead, Angela.
Sure. Well, those are terrible working conditions, and Amazon is also a really terrible example of capitalism. I believe that they just took on a government contract to help the CIA out and host some of their business. So let's definitely talk about how bad Amazon is. I would like to point out that a lot of the people who in Los Angeles are undocumented immigrants and selling hot dogs and churros on the side of the street, well, they're trying to, right, when the government's not harassing them. They are some of the best examples of capitalists, and I really admire their hard work and determination, their entrepreneurial spirit, and their ability to fight through diversity to try to provide for their families. I think that we should keep an open mind when we talk about what the nature of capitalism is, and that we should normalize that it's okay to want to provide for yourself and to feel good about it, and that's not always putting other people down.
Go ahead, Rez. Please finish out the segment.
All right. So Angela mentioned something which I do agree with. In an ideal world, you would have mostly teenagers working minimum wage job, but we don't live in an ideal society. I believe the average age of a minimum wage worker is 30-something years old, and that's the average age. So teenagers are not working this minimum wage job. Full-grown adults with families are, and because of that reality, American workers should be paid a living wage, and this would stimulate the economy. So I think I'm thankful that the Biden administration is proposing this, and it's finally about time that Americans are paid a living wage. And in terms of that, in terms of the COVID relief bill, I think we will see a V-shaped recovery under President Biden. The COVID relief bill will provide the much-needed aid to American people, and I predict that by fall, Americans will be able to attend football games, travel, and find economic prosperity under the leadership of President Biden.
I'm so excited that we had our guests. I love having diverse views. I hope you, as the viewer, got something out of all of our friends here today. If you liked or disagreed with their statements, comment that below. Share us on social media. Give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.